Hey John, do you want to know why my living room's full of cardboard contraptions at the moment?
Lay it on me.
Well, it might be the same reason yours is too, I imagine. Because Labo VR turns 1 year old today. It's kind of wild to me that this is already 1 year old. It feels like just yesterday when it felt like VR was never going to be a thing Nintendo actually explored. And I thought it'd be fun for us to get together and discuss the state of Nintendo and VR, whether the experience still holds up a year later, how the games since then have been updated for VR, including some I didn't even know about till recently. Now, before we dive too deep into our revisitation of Labo VR, I do want to go back in time real quick to the year 2015, when Polygon had the chance to ask Reggie whether Nintendo would explore VR, and this is what Reggie had to say. We have knowledge of the technical space, and we've been experimenting with this for a long, long time. What we believe is that in order for this technology to move forward, you need to make it fun and you need to make it social. And that's so interesting looking back, because that basically is Labo VR. They made it extremely fun, to me at least, and they did try to make it as social as possible. Like one of the angles with Labo VR, it's like, yeah, you hold up to your face, when you're done, just pass it to your friend. There's no head strap, it's super easy to hop in and out of VR, and there was even some multiplayer games included in Labo VR to kind of like showcase that functionality. And further to that point, in 2017, Reggie also said, the problem with VR is that there aren't a lot of experiences that are truly fun. And since Labo VR, I actually picked up an Oculus Quest, which to me is one of the more ideal headsets out there because it's completely wireless, it's totally self-contained, and I appreciate that about VR. And I've dove in and out of quite a few experiences, and yeah, a lot of it isn't that great. Like once you get over the novelty, it's not that fun. So anyways, I thought it was fun to look back at Reggie's quotes because they were touching on what Labo VR was way back in 2015. So my question to you is, John, now that you've been revisiting it, what's it been like for you? Did you still have fun revisiting Labo VR?
I mean, you forget how fun it is just to play Labo VR. The actual software itself is insanely fun.
Right?
And I think what makes Labo VR special is the Toy-Con. With like regular Labo, like the Toy-Con was still ingenious then, but they really found their footing with VR, I feel, because what you do in the virtual reality space is an extension of the Toy-Con. Like with the blaster game, you get this sort of physical feedback when pulling the trigger and reloading. It feels great. Like you have like this little pump that you can feel whenever you reload on the blaster, and that just like carries through to the virtual world, and it feels really great. But more than that, for me, I think the thing holding me back from virtual reality as a whole is the barrier to entry. I realize there are some more affordable headsets out there. But when you think about it in the context of like buying a new console, or when you think about what console you're going to get, you think about the exclusives, you think about the price, you think about the features, and I find it hard for myself to justify like investing that much on a headset when all I really want is Half-Life Alyx.
Exactly.
But with Labo, it's just so affordable. Like it was really cheap just to get the blaster and headset on its own. And then if you want like the more elaborate stuff, getting all the Toy-Con was still fairly affordable. And of course, it's a more budget VR experience. You're not going to get the image quality you would get with something more beefy, but still, it manages to be really engaging. Like I was surprised how immersive this was the first time I tried it, and picking it up again, it's still really good.
Yeah, I pretty much echo all those thoughts. I went back, I said I loved Labo VR originally, and now that I have an Oculus Quest, and I've been diving into Half-Life Alyx, because I've been streaming it from my PC to the Quest, which is basically as state-of-the-art of a VR experience as you can possibly get. I was so curious to see whether Labo VR would hold up for me. It obviously, as you said, is more limited in its technology and in what it can detect and sense, and even its visual quality. Of course, it's much lower screen resolution. And yeah, it was a bit of a shock going back to it at first. I was like, whoa, this is quite a bit lower resolution than I remembered. But after a few minutes, I completely forgot about it, and I was just sucked right back into these experiences. And it gets back to what Nintendo was saying, or what Reggie was saying. You need to make it fun, and they did. They made it so darn fun. Using the blaster and feeling that physical recoil of each shot. Or one of my favorites is still that Bird Dash game, where you're flying around flapping with your hands, and you're getting kind of like a full body experience. Even though the game can't really detect what your whole body's doing, it kind of feels like it does, because in that game, you have to like lean into the corners in order to, turn and twist, and it just feels so convincing, especially in combination with the wind pedal, which is one of the most simplest and genius things I've ever seen in my life, where each time you press it, it shoots like a gust of air into your face. And as silly as these little like Toy-Con touches are, they really do augment the experience. And I think I think partially why Labo VR works is because, yeah, it is more limited obviously than most other VR headsets in terms of how versatile they can be, but it knows what its limitations are, and it works within them, while also offering some things that other VR devices don't, as we just touched on with the force feedback in some ways, or the sensation of gust of air hitting you in the face, plus a few other things like using a camera and you're physically turning the lens on the camera itself to zoom in and out. It's just impresses me like what Nintendo did with a Switch, Joy-Cons, and a bunch of cardboard, and how convincing it is. Going back to Labo VR was just a treat for me. It was just a complete joy. And I was shocked at how well it held up, especially after playing, as I mentioned earlier, Half-Life Alyx, which, don't get me wrong, is a super impressive experience its own, and one that's very different from Labo VR in quite a few ways. But for as much as it may push a medium forward, it's also held back by the same shortcomings that most room-scale VR experiences are, being the physical confinement of your actual room size, or the fact that most of the things you interact with don't have any weight or proper feedback to them, including the fact that a wall in virtual reality obviously can't exist in real life, so you have nothing to lean up against. And Labo VR, as I said, it works within its own limitations, so you're not really hitting up against any of those other boundaries that you would in a lot of other VR experiences. Like in the shooter game, it's not asking you to walk around the room, and it's instead treating it as more of a theme park ride where you're in an attraction or like a moving vehicle and shooting things around you. And also, to that point real quick, I've had some of the best sense of scale in that blaster game of any VR experience. If that crab jumps at you, holy god, it's still intense.
It really is. One thing I love about the lack of the limitations it has, there's some really clever ways to get around them. Like the elephant basically has face tracking. Those dots on the elephant's face. And that's one of my favorite Toy-Con, because you can paint. There's a 3D painting game in there, and just moving the little trunk around, it feels so natural. It's really accurate, just the way it reads those little dots on the elephant's face, and you can just go through all these different sort of pens and markers and just makes some really crazy stuff in 3D space. It feels great, as does the marble game. Like when you're moving around those marble and trying to get them through the holes, it feels great to move that around in 3D space.
Yeah, I went back to the marble game in particular, and that thing still blows my mind on how it works. It's offering you one-to-one arm tracking or hand tracking on a device, again, that wasn't meant to be used in this way originally at all, and it feels good. Now, this is something, that Half-Life Alyx is doing constantly. You're always using both hands in the game, whereas the elephant game or the marble game is, restricted to one. But there's something about it that's still just really impressive. It really is magic in that sense. Like, Labo VR feels like magic. In that it works at all and works as convincingly as it does. But that marble game is so well designed. It's offering this physics-based puzzler that offers incredibly accurate tracking that has, pretty impressive physics too, as I kind of just touched on, including a gravity gun. It feels a little bit like Half-Life, actually, which is very fitting given the game I just came from. And yeah, it's really fun just to move the platforms around, try to figure out how to get the balls through the goals. And in combination with the HD rumble, it is very, it's just incredibly convincing and making it feel like you're grabbing these platforms and interacting with these objects that aren't there, but kind of feel like they do. Like you can feel the marble roll along a platform as you're holding it.
And I forgot just how elaborate a lot of these mini games are. There's a bunch of different games in here, and each one is just filled to the brim with content. That marble one in particular has a bunch of stages. Mm-hmm. And one thing that was kind of a limitation of this is the Labo VR Garage. They give you a bunch of games made within the garage, but you can't actually share user-made content, which is a huge hurdle because the actual garage-based levels are really amazing. It shows you the potential of what you can make. And there's some games that have nothing to do with anything else in the collection, and they somehow program them in. And we recently saw someone remake a Zelda shrine within this, and it was super cool. But there's no way to play it.
The whole Labo Garage thing is the biggest missed opportunity I think I've seen Nintendo do, because that was effectively dreams before dreams. Granted, it's not nearly as robust and it's much harder to use. I think that interface is a complete disaster. But we've seen some incredibly intricate and well-made games in there. I've seen someone else. I meant to cover it before. I never got around to it. I feel bad for not doing so, but I was in contact with the creators. But some guy remade the Bomb Battlefield in there. Another individual made something else that was impressive. Oh, it was Donkey Kong. They remade the original arcade version of Donkey Kong in Labo VR. Again, it was really neat. Yeah, but the fact that people are making their own games in this, and that you can't share them at all, which kind of goes against Reggie's, social philosophy a little bit. It's such a huge bummer because we could have seen games like Dreams Like Experience on Switch before it was on PS4. But hey, what are you gonna do? But to that point, there's so much to do in Labo VR. If you get the full set for $80, You're getting a shooter, you're getting a flight simulator, you're getting a physics-based puzzler, a photography game, a 3D painting program, and as you touched on, a stupid amount of mini-games, such as like pinball or table tennis or any number of things. There is such a huge amount of variety there, and each one offers something just compelling and something that really, has been done to some degree, obviously, in other VR platforms, but the way they're pulled off here is some of the best I've seen. I've played, there's like this cliff diving game I've done, or base jumping game in Oculus, but I love that bird game so much more. It's just so fun. And the fact that they added also like a light exploration element too, it's just really like the cherry on top of the whole thing.
This may sound basic, but one of my favorite mini games within those was just this sort of baseball kind of inspired game where like a ball flies at you and you literally just hit it back. And the way like your face tracking and hand tracking works within that just feels so natural.
Right.
Like, you can just literally hit it and look to the left, just watch it go. And it just feels immersive. It's one of the most immersive feelings I've had in Labo VR.
Yeah, and you know what it reminds me of a little bit, actually? It takes me back to Wii Sports, where Wii Sports was such an incredibly impressive piece of technology at the time with how it was able to read your hand movements using the Wii Remote, even though it was also, like, that technology was actually pretty limited. But the Nintendo understood how best to use the Wii Remote, and they made it work. Like, Wii Sports obviously took off like a rocket. Unfortunately, Labo VR didn't quite take off in the same way. But Labo VR does remind me of it, because it's obviously more limited. You can't, there aren't a ton of experiences you can offer using the Toy-Cons beyond what they did already. But the ones that do take advantage of them, use them to the best of their ability, and offer, as I've said a few times now, honestly some of my favorite experiences in VR yet. Yeah, it's more limited. You can't like peek around corners or anything. It's not reading your body movements, but it doesn't need to, because for the experience that they designed around it, they work so freaking well that I would absolutely still recommend this. If you're curious about VR at all, I would still highly recommend Labo VR as a perfect entry point into the marketplace. Just to say if it's something that would interest you, even if it's not as high end as the other devices. It's just such a fun way to engage with that type of content.
Like, it's been a while since we built any Labo now, but I love the way that it sort of it lets you in on all the little secrets and show you how, like, it shows you how everything works. And I find like if you were a kid growing up building Labo sets, that might even push you on a path to like engineering or like software engineering and wanting to figure out how to program this stuff. And like if you got really into the garage stuff and figured out the programming there, I think that's just a brilliant way of trying to teach people. It's like an educational kind of game in some ways.
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, that's basically what the foundation of Labo was. That you're building these creations, and and you're understanding how they operate and how they work and how the cardboard meshes with the technology of the Switch to make this magic come to life. And Labo VR really is the culmination of that. Like, it's the best overall Labo experience. It feels far less kid-focused, even though it's perfect for kids at the same time. And as you're saying, it's super impressive just to see the game walk you through, how to build the technology and how it works. Like, it continues to blow my mind when you're seeing the full in-game diagram of the contraptions you're using and how they actually represent on screen one-to-one of how you're interacting with them. Like, whether you're pushing the pedal on the wind pedal, or when you're pulling back the blaster, for instance, it's all it's all fully analog. Again, I'm coming from Half-Life Alyx, where you have to manually reload your shotgun, and I'm still blown away by how that blaster works in Labo VR. When you pull it back, you shoot it, and then you feel the force feedback of it. So I'm with you. Like, it's a really cool, I would think, educational tool, certainly more than most games, and I really think Labo VR is like truly something special, and it really bums me out that as far as we know, it didn't really take off in the marketplace.
I think it did better than, at least the vehicle kit. I mean, the vehicle kit was fun too as well, that's the thing.
It was fun. It was a fun little toy.
Yeah, but I think the barrier to entry was just too high with other Labo kits, but the VR kit was pretty reasonably priced.
Yeah. And that's not even to mention, as I've kind of touched on earlier, the fact that there are 6 other games that support Labo VR. 3 from Nintendo, 7 other games. 4 from Nintendo and 3 from third parties. So I guess let's go ahead and move on, at least for now, on to some of the other games that support Labo VR. And let's talk first party for a moment. So the first 2 that came out, of course, were Zelda Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, just a few days after Labo VR on April 25th. They both had VR updates of varying scale. You can play the entirety of Zelda Breath of the Wild in VR, whereas Mario Odyssey included a few little bonus missions. And then Smash Bros. Came about a month later, which added VR support, so you can play a standard match while viewing it, as if you were like looking at a model almost. And then Captain Toad added it 2 months after that in July of 2019. And that's the final game from Nintendo, as far as we know, to support Labo VR. So do any of those experiences like really stand out to you, John, or...?
Odyssey stands out to me as being disappointing. I mean, that's Mario in VR. It was meant to be like this premiere experience. Like, Mario usually defines his genres and shows you what, how developers should be working in that space, but it just felt so tacked on.
Yeah.
I finished it in, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes, and...
That's probably longer than it actually was. I think it took me almost 9 minutes maybe to do.
Yeah, it's generous.
Yeah, that was such a bummer, because Mario has been at the forefront often of technology, whether it's showcasing 3D or how to use a Wii remote pointer. And it feels like such a perfect, you can do anything with Mario, and they gave Mario Odyssey the lamest possible implementation, where you just have a stationary camera, you're watching Mario run around you, and it's cool for like 30 seconds. It's just not that fun, and it's not even that useful. Like, it's hard to see what Mario's doing way off in the distance, and it's just a really shallow experience. Like, as a free thing, as a free little bonus, I can't complain too much. But for me, it really was Zelda Breath of the Wild that really won me over. It was a complete opposite of Mario, where they didn't build any custom content for VR. They just gave you the full game and let you go nuts with it and play in VR. And I thought, and at first I hated it. I felt like a little bit of motion sickness. The game clearly wasn't designed with that in mind. It's only 30 frames per second, which isn't great for VR. The head tracking works oddly in the game. And yet, when I went back to it to give it another shot, it totally won me over. Like, seeing these mountains scale over you, or tower over you, or encountering a guardian with it chasing after you as you're running away, trying to avoid his laser blast, shooting at the camera. Or even in more tranquil moments, like just climbing a mountain or exploring a forest. Like, every moment of that game literally was enhanced by VR for me. Sure, the resolution's super low. It's pretty hard to see, like small objects in the distance. I'm zooming in constantly to see, is that an enemy or a bush? But it's a small trade-off for me because I've had so much fun. Like, I feel like had I reviewed that game in VR originally, I might give it a higher score than I did, because I've had such a fun experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think this reinvigorated Breath of the Wild for you, because you had a pretty reasonable amount of hours in there. I think you had like 200 hours clocked in already.
Right.
But after the VR update, I think it's gone way up for you since then.
It's stupid, yeah.
Yeah, and I played it myself as well, and I played it for a while in VR, not to the extent that you did, but I really liked it as well. Like you said, the actual motion tracking was weird, because it has that smoothness of Breath of the Wild's camera, even when you're moving your head around, which kind of feels disorientating with actual movements. But once that's off, I actually found it to be a pretty great experience, and just going through Breath of the Wild again and just experiencing Hyrule in VR, like, it really gives you a sense of scale. Like, you can look up at a mountain and see how small Link is in comparison to that. It's just a really good experience, and it's something I wish they did to Odyssey too. Like, just put VR in Odyssey, that's all it needed. Maybe there were some technical limitations stopping that, but I'm sure that would have been just as good.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I wish they had just gone for what seems to me a simpler implementation. Instead of making bonus content, just give us the core game in VR. That worked in Zelda's case, and I think it could work for Mario. But yeah, as you're saying, yeah, it gives a sense of scale to Breath of the Wild that I think can be otherwise missing. Like, it felt like it just really amplified every sensation I had originally with that game, just on another level. Feeling the scale of those mountains in this giant open world, like, it really kind of puts you there. And I've seen some people, say, well, it's not VR because it's not first person, and I could not disagree with that more. I don't think a game needs to, like, physically put you in that world for it to be even more immersive, and Zelda is proof of that fact. It's taking an extremely solid game and enhancing it with giving you this full field view of this, magical world. And yeah, it just, like, if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend giving it a shot. I put together a whole video offering tips on how to get used to VR and VR and Zelda, because it's absolutely worth it. And one tip I didn't have back then is I would recommend getting a hands-free set. I haven't tried any of the full third-party replacements out there, but I am using a strap or a head strap that you just augment the current Labo kit with from SweatProof Gaming, and it works great. So I wear that all the time when playing Zelda in VR, and having my hands free to use a proper Pro Controller, it just feels great. And I can kind of like subtly move my head around to get a different perspective on the environment. I love it. So I really it sounds weird to be raving about what's really a low resolution experience, but it adds so much more than it takes away to me.
So Breath of the Wild 2 doesn't have VR. Is that instant hate?
I mean, I will be disappointed. I'm really not expecting it. I hope it's there because it's presumably the same engine or a very similar engine. So I'm hoping they'll just throw it in there because why not? But yeah, I'm not expecting it. But please have it in there. I've gone back to it recently, even before we planned this discussion. I've been playing it back in VR, and it's just been a great experience. Just a couple weeks ago, I re-encountered one of those giant sandworm things. I forget what they're called. And that thing just took my breath away. Like, it just leapt into the air. It's like sand shooting everywhere, and it gets your heart pumping. Like again, the graphical or the fidelity isn't great, but you forget about it. Like, it's so easy to forget about it and just lose yourself into the experience.
I did a really dumb thing too when it first came out, where I took the wind pedal and sort of used that to give myself my own immersion. So I'd jump off a cliff and then get out the glider and just start like pumping at the wind pedals to try and get that sense of it's like 4D experience almost.
I love that.
It's dumb, but it still feels good though.
Yeah, it absolutely works. Like, it sounds dumb, but yeah, I mean, even going back to that frog game in Labo VR, where you're just jumping in place, the fact that you feel like gust of wind every time you leap into the air, it just adds to the experience. And obviously it does, because Disney uses similar techniques on arguably their best ride, being Avatar Flight of Passage, where it's shooting air into your face, you feel like water droplets. You don't want water with Labo VR probably, even though that would enhance the experience even more. But yeah, this I said it before, it really did remind me a little bit like that bird game of a home version of Flight of Passage at Disney World, which is, it's just a super fun experience. But moving back to the first party games that also support Labo VR, we got two others, the first of which was Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which I think might be one of the lamer. I think it's right up there with Mario Odyssey in terms of, you know what?
It's a really low effect. It almost feels 2D at times.
Exactly right. That's the biggest problem with it. I had to do like in-depth analysis in Photoshop to see if there was any difference in the camera angle, and there is, but it's so slight that the sense of depth is pretty much non-existent. I don't know why they went that route.
Yeah, I mean, one thing it is good for though is you can kind of break some stages just by looking around and seeing like where they made some where they sort of made their cuts to put things together. So it's cool in that sense. But yeah, apart from that, it's just kind of giving you this 3D look at Smash, and it's cool for a little bit, but it's nothing I'd return to.
Yeah, that's totally it. It's more interesting from a behind the scenes perspective of how they built these stages, because you can see them in ways that you were never intended to. And that's the best part about it. But as a VR experience, it's pretty lackluster. I mean, it's not even lackluster, it's just bad. It's probably the worst. It's actually probably the worst of the first party games here.
It is. I'd say so.
But on the other hand, one of my favorite experiences, as short-lived as it is the Captain Toad Treasure Tracker update. What this added was a quick little VR mode. They give you a whole little VR hub that gets built out slowly, or pretty quickly I suppose, as you go through the 4 levels that they give you to re-experience in VR. And even though there's not a lot of gameplay there, you can get through the whole thing in 10 to 15 minutes. I loved it. This game was such a perfect fit for VR. I wish they'd just give you the entire game in that experience, because it makes it so much more intimate. Because typically, I mean, it's very much like the actual game where you're still viewing the game, you're still viewing it from the same camera's perspective, but it feels way more intimate. Like, now it feels like you're kind of like right up against a dollhouse, as you're maneuvering Captain Toad through, and you can kind of position the camera too to make it feel even far grander than it would in any other way. And I kind of just lost myself in that experience as well.
Well, I think a big part of it too is Captain Toad's a spin-off of 3D World, which is a sequel to 3D Land, and that game was kind of made with 3D in mind.
Right.
And like going from 3D Land to 3D World, there always was something missing from the perspective, because it felt like 3D Land was just perfect for stereoscopic 3D. So bringing Captain Toad into a proper 3D space now, it feels natural. It feels like this is how it really should have been experienced. And yeah, like just going through these levels, they feel like they were made. Like these pretty much are just those levels from Captain Toad but put into VR, but they feel like they were made for VR from the very beginning. it's just such a natural conversion.
Yeah, especially the minecart level where it feels like an amusement park ride. You can use your head to actually aim where you're shooting the turnips.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as you're touching on as well, the hub world is like taking all these Captain Toad elements and just kind of put them around you in 360 degrees. You can spin around and catch all these little Easter eggs and details. It's just super cool. Like, it's a small update, but it leaves such a big impression on you, though.
That's a great way of putting it. I mean, that really is closer to, that is more what I expected of Mario in VR than I would of Captain Toad. But yeah, Captain Toad's great, and I just wish it would go back and give us a full game, or as much of it as possible in VR, but I don't see it happening at this point, because we're almost a year out from that update, or I guess 9 months, so yeah. But on the other hand, third parties have come through and have also added support for some of their games in VR, including Spice and Wolf VR, Rooms The Adventure of Anne and George, as well as Neon Wall. Now, the latter, I haven't played Spice and Wolf in VR yet, but I did give the latter two a try, both of which I hadn't done before. And I was going to comment, like, I wonder if it was even worth them adding to it, if they sold anything additional, but hey, they got 2 more sales out of me for it. And these games are doing, both these games are doing something cool with it. So in Neon Wall, the premise is it looks like you get basically sucked into a pinball game, and it then turns into like a bit of like an action puzzler. We have to change the color of the ball and interact with the environment it's rolling along. So it's like a side-scrolling, it's kind of like a side-scrolling game, or more of like a 3/4 perspective. But what's really cool is in VR is you can just move your head to get a better look in the environment. So it's like it's super, it's bright, it's neon colors. It looks really cool in VR, especially with the dark background. It really stands out. And you can tilt your head to like look behind you or ahead of you to see more of the course. And especially with the fact that if you have a headset, you can untether the Joy-Cons and use them as actual pointers, because it uses, like, you basically have 2 guns in the game that you shoot the ball with, and you can kind of, you can use them as pointers and kind of even further adds to the immersion. So I thought that was really neat. That game seems to be pretty cool based on my maybe half an hour playtime, so I would recommend checking it out, especially if Labo VR. But it's still basically the same core experience, just in VR. But what Room's doing is a little bit more interesting in terms of a visual presentation. Because normally, so this is a game where it basically takes place in these magical mansions, which you see it from a side perspective, and you travel room to room in these tiny rooms, and you can move these rooms around and interact with them in various ways to get your character from the beginning to the end. Now, normally when you're playing on the TV, you're just seeing like a 2D perspective of you pressed up right up against the mansion. So you almost lose perspective of what it is. But when you play in VR, you're actually set back in this plaza, and you're viewing it as if it were an actual house. You can see the mansion surrounding the rooms you're interacting with, and you can do a full 360 and see the entire courtyard outside the mansion. And it's such a cool little detail. Like, it doesn't add anything in a gameplay sense, but it kind of puts you more into the world itself, and it's such a cool little thing.
That does sound super cool. I actually, the only one I actually heard of that supported VR was Spice and Wolf.
Right? The same here.
Yeah, I mean, they've been pretty quiet about these Labo updates. I guess it is a pretty niche thing, but it's surprising that like so few third parties have been following this, because we have games on the Switch that were kind of made for VR, like Thumper's on the Switch and
yes.
Superhot's on the Switch. But neither of which, that I know of, support Labo VR.
Yeah, Super Hot would be a little bit difficult because it does, I think that one does depend more on body tracking, but Thumper is such a perfect candidate. I've already bothered the developer bugged the developer on Twitter about this, because the game already exists in VR. You can play it on Oculus in VR, you can play it on PSVR in VR, obviously. But you can't play it on Switch in VR, and it is such like that game is, it would just work incredibly well on Labo VR, and I wish they would add it, because there's no reason why it shouldn't work. And I understand why. It's a budget issue. Like, they probably don't think they'll sell any additional beyond what they have. But I would love if they tried it, because that game would be perfect. But yeah, it is nice to say that there's some level of third-party support on here, mostly, or entirely from indie developers. As you touched on, I didn't even know about Rooms and Neon Wall until I did research up, in advance of this video. I'm like, oh wow, I gotta check those out. That sounds super cool. And they've been really really cool, well done experiences. I would love if more games took advantage of it.
Yeah. Do you know one game that that is really surprising that doesn't take advantage of Labo VR?
What?
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
Yes!
It works with the vehicle kit and the Labo the bike as well. So there's this big precedent for Mario Kart basically being the key supporter of Labo in Nintendo first party, but for some reason, no Labo VR.
It's completely baffling, especially when you consider the fact there was already a first-person mode in Mario Kart 7, and then Mario Kart has already existed in VR with the newest form of the arcade version. There's like a few centers around the world where you can play Mario Kart in VR already. So why can't you play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in VR? I mean, they wouldn't even need to implement the first-person mode as shown by Breath of the Wild or, Captain Toad and all these other games. Just make the game in VR. Like, that would be so fun, I think. It would further add to the experience, especially giving you the ability to look around you, seeing these players, your opponents closer up, being able to take in the environment, these beautiful environments in full 3D with your full field of vision being filled up. I just don't get it. I don't know why they skipped Mario Kart.
Here's one thing they could do as well. Like, outside of just playing Mario Kart in VR, there could be a side mode where you can explore with a free camera, and you're playing as Lakitu.
Oh!
You're flying around, you can get as close to these courses as you want, you can just fly over, catch every detail. That'd be so awesome for Mario Kart.
And that ties back into the whole idea of Lakitu being a cameraman as well. That is so perfect. You got little 3D goggles, that'd be great. So, John, what do you think the odds are that Nintendo does anything else with Labo VR?
It feels like it's done.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if they do anything more. But if they were to do anything more, it'd probably be Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But that train it's long left the station.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's a chance, but I don't really see it happening.
I don't either. It's such a bummer because legitimately, some of Nintendo's experiences in VR have been my favorite in VR. Period. Again, I understand. It's in many cases some people wouldn't consider it full VR with no proper hand tracking, but I think I've come to realize some of my favorite VR experiences aren't the ones trying to replicate real life. They're the ones that just take a really solid experience currently and just augment it with VR. And there is some middle ground in there too, such as Astrobot, which was my game of the year last year, was it? Or the year before? Whichever year it came out in. That was my game of the year, and that was a game that basically took what could almost be a standalone third person platformer and, just had some really smart VR mechanics added on top of it, whether it's interacting directly with Astrobot or, using your head to actually interact with physical, like knocking back barriers or dodging enemies. But for the most part, that game could probably exist outside of VR, but it was made better because of VR. And I think that totally works. And I would love to see more developers just kind of throw it in there. You don't need to make these custom experiences. I think you can take existing experiences and just enhance it for the platform.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the bigger developers, VR is usually just a side mode. I think in Tomb Raider, it might be Rise of the Tomb Raider or Shadow of the Tomb Raider, there was like a side VR mode in Lara's Mansion. It feels like the bigger AAA developers don't want to put the budget into a VR game because it's, of course, going to be a lower audience. Half-Life Alyx might have changed something, I don't know. I think Half-Life Alyx definitely pushed VR forward, but I don't know if that's going to have a ricochet effect of it being mainstream.
Yeah,
I don't know when that's gonna happen.
That's it. I mean, I'm playing Half-Life Alyx. I'm most of the way through the game now, and I'm having a really good time with it. But at the same time, it's not really making me any more interested in the room scale experience. And maybe I'm in the minority. I know a lot of people who have current VR headsets, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that many people, but they really do like the room scale. But I find it almost as limiting as it is freeing, because you do have to worry about real world boundaries, or when you encounter something in the game like a wall, you can't actually lean up against it because there's no wall there. And it's something I'm nitpicking, but these little tiny nitpicks do chip away at the core VR experience. Like, they're trying to sell you on this level of immersion, but then there's things that remind you constantly you're not actually in that world. Whereas, when you have a game that you exist as like a third party to the action, it almost kind of feels more immersive in some way, because you're not running up against those boundaries. Because in Zelda, for instance, you're just a camera, and it kind of makes it easier to feel like you're alongside Link rather than being Link, in which case you might encounter some of those issues we touched on. Labo VR, as we already kind of mentioned, works around these issues by more limiting the experience and working within those limitations. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's just some real barriers to full scale VR that just makes it tough for it to have mainstream appeal. Whether it's price, the fact that you're wearing a headset, the fact that you need a large environment for some of these games to play in. And again, as much as I like Half-Life Alyx, and it wouldn't be what it is if it didn't have the technology to back it up, I don't know if I need a ton more experiences like that. So, and I don't know if people want to be moving around constantly, to play VR games.
I mean, that's the thing too, some of the biggest VR games are games like Beat Saber, which are pretty intensive. And yeah, I mean, I think just those core experiences are, I haven't delved into VR that much myself, but just those core experiences seem to be few and far between. Like, there don't seem to be that many full-fledged games or games that sort of understand the limitations and work within them. A lot of them seem to go for the more radical concepts, which makes you stand out more. But just as making this like a more sustainable experience, I don't know if that's the way forward.
Right. Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. Well, speaking of way forward, what do you think is the future of Nintendo and VR, John? Do you think there is a future there? I mean, it's still kind of wild to me that we even have a VR device from Nintendo at all, because for the longest time it seemed like they were never going to like properly explore it. But here we are a year later with a I call it a platform. It kind of is a platform, a small ecosystem, but one that offers some truly great experiences in my opinion. What do you think the future is of Nintendo VR? Do you think they'll continue to explore it at all, with a separate device perhaps, or with a Switch 2, or do you think they'll abandon it for the, immediate future?
It's hard to say, because they do kind of acknowledge their past in VR with the Virtual Boy. There's a video in Labo VR where you actually go into the Virtual Boy, and I think you watch a little gameplay clip of Mario Tennis.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they have done it before, technically. I think this probably isn't the end. This shows that Nintendo can work within VR quite well, like extraordinarily well, really. It just comes to, I think, where technology goes. I don't think Nintendo's the kind of developer that's gonna give us an accessory that's that's like too luxury. I don't think we're gonna get a VR headset that's the same price as a console from Nintendo. So if VR can get to the point where it's just readily available, like you can get one for maybe $100, I think that's when Nintendo might go in on this. But until then, I can't really see them doing a dedicated headset.
See, that's what I wonder. I mean, I agree that we won't. I don't think we'll get a dedicated headset from Nintendo, but I think they could offer something along the lines of what they have with Labo VR for, say, a Switch 2. Just give us like the actual goggle portion itself. You still slide the Switch into it like you currently do. Offer Joy-Cons with better motion tracking, perhaps using cameras or the same technology that the Oculus Quest does. And there you go. You have a ready to go VR system without requiring much beyond the core console itself. And with a Switch 2, the screen resolution will be higher. It still may not be up to the level of a proper, of a bespoke VR headset or VR platform, but it could be something that's good enough. And with how well Switch is doing, and how well presumably a Switch 2 may continue to sell, oh man, I would love if they explored that option. Doing more with VR by kind of looking at what they did with Breath of the Wild, and they don't need to make these really expensive experiences. They can just take existing experiences and make it work with their upcoming, with an upcoming VR headset.
I mean, that's also kind of the beauty of the Switch, is just how versatile it is. And I think Labo, more than any game, just showcases that wonderfully. Like, look at the Joy-Con, for instance. That just looks like a controller, just looking at it. But it does amazing things with the IR sensor, things that I didn't think were possible. I remember when the robot kit came out, it was found out that the IR camera reads the strings, the way you pull them, and that's how it gets the inputs in there.
Right.
And the way Labo works with that in VR as well is just so good. It's so cool. And just being able to take the Switch, like this console, taking a console and inserting it into a cardboard frame, and that becoming a VR experience, it's insanely versatile, and it would be a step back if the next console isn't anything like this.
I know, I really hope it is. It'll be really curious to see how things go, but I've loved how Nintendo has made use of VR so far, and I would love to see what more they could do with it. Beyond, I mean, as I said, at the very least, just offering existing experiences in VR, but even seeing more custom VR experiences from Nintendo would just be a fun thing to see what they could do with the platform. Because they understand how to make fun games. So do you have any other games you would like to see in VR from Nintendo though, John? Do you have anything in mind that jumps out at you beyond possibly Breath of the Wild 2 and of course Mario Kart?
Metroid Prime.
Oh, yes!
Just seeing that HUD in VR, that's all I want. Just seeing your health bar sort of floating in 3D space and just having it all sort of contextualized where it is on the plane. That would work so well.
That would be great.
It doesn't even have to be Prime 4. If it's just Prime Trilogy, like Metroid Prime 1 in VR, that would just be incredible. Imagine landing on Talon 4, looking up, and just sort of seeing the raindrops fall onto your visor in virtual reality.
Oh my god. And then you can have Metroids actually latch onto your head, and you're right up against them, which is kind of like what I've experienced in Half-Life Alyx with head crabs. And also, even on the existing Labo, you could use one of the rear remotes as like a pointer. You'd have to recenter it, but you could use that as an extension of Samus's gun. And it really could offer just a really compelling VR experience as is. So man, I am right there with you. That would be amazing. For me though, what I was going to say was palette wings. I love that freaking bird game, and if they can offer something similar in Palo Wings, with offering a variety of vehicles and environments for you to fly through, oh, that could be just such a lovely experience. Like, imagine like hang gliding, you can like look down at the ground below you, or using the jetpack to kind of like, shoot your way around around like a cityscape. Oh, it could be great. So.
That would be another one to work great with the wind pedal too, like just being up in the air and just sort of feeling the wind hit you up. Like what if you have something like you're on like a balloon or something, like balloon fight kind of, and you just sort of put that pedal down, the balloon inflates, and you just go up in the air. That'd be a great feeling. All
right, I'm gonna get carried away here. What I would actually love is if they made a special accessory for Palo Wings, a Bluetooth-controlled fan, or where it's synced up to the Switch, and the Switch can tell it exactly how hard to blow to give you the sensation of actually flying through the air. Like if you're diving, it'll like kick out a stronger gust of air. And if you're like standing completely still, you won't feel anything at all. Like, wouldn't that be neat?
So would it be like a Starlink kind of controller where it's like a Joy-Con grip with a fan in the middle almost?
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about that. I guess that's one way to do it. I was thinking more like it's just a fan you set up on a table in front of you or something. But yeah,
I mean that would work.
Yeah, but having it attached to the headset or controller, that could also work. So, all right, John, is there anything else about Labo VR, any of the support or anything involving Nintendo Labo or Nintendo and VR that you want to get out there that we haven't already?
I think I've kind of said everything I want to say, but just go back to it is what I'll say, because I think we forget how impressive this stuff is. I played around with Labo VR a lot when it first came out, but much like the rest of Labo, it kind of went back into my closet after a while.
Same here, yeah.
The actual headset itself has been sitting on my desk for a long time. I often kick that out, but the Toy-Con, yeah, they just kind of stay in there. But when you bring it out, it takes you back to how good this was in the first place. So if you've not experienced before, or if you have, I'd say give it a go. It's still really good.
Well said. I really do think it's a magical experience. Like the fact what Nintendo made work here with the technology available is nothing short of magic, and the environment and the experiences they gave that it enables are just really fun for me. They're short-lived for the most part, albeit minus Zelda, of course. And some of the third-party games, but they are just a complete blast. So, do you ever see yourself going back to Zelda in VR, John, or do you think you're kind of over that? But I know you're a huge Breath of the Wild fan, so do you think you'll ever go back in VR?
It's been a little while, and maybe I will though. Maybe I'll go back on a little Breath of the Wild kick. Because honestly, it does enhance a lot. It does take some stuff away. The image quality is quite a bit worse, but yeah, when you get back in there, once you've played for around maybe 5 minutes, I think you start to not really care about about what it takes away, because what it brings is also just as impressive. So you know what? I think I actually would. I keep my Labo VR headset on my desk most of the time, so it's really accessible. You can just literally slide the switch in, and then you're ready to go. There's no setup, there's no wires. It's so simple to play in VR.
That you actually hit on something. Like, that's part of the genius of the whole Labo VR set. Is it's incredibly simple to use. There's no wires, no cords, there's no separate battery pack or anything. All right. Well, with that, I think we're about done here. So thank you so much for watching our 1-year anniversary celebration of Labo VR. If you like what you watched, make sure to click the subscribe button and ring that bell for lots more on maybe VR in the future. Hopefully, we're hoping, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.